Here's True seems to have assumed what Michel Barrett calls Althusser's Lacan. However, as he puts it, the complex and azarous process of formation of a human adult from a small animal does not necessarily correspond to Althusser's mechanism of ideology, unless the child remains in Lacan's mirror face, or unless we fill the child's cradle with anthropological assumptions. Here's 1999. His response to this is somewhat perfunctory. I have no quarrel with children, and I do not wish to pronounce them blind, deaf, or dumb, merely to deny that they possess the capacities of philosophical subjects, that they have the attributes of knowing subjects independent of their formation and training as social beings. What is at issue here is the capacity of self-recognition, but it is an unwarrantable assumption to make that recognition is a purely cognitive, let alone philosophical attribute, and unlike that it should appear in the child at one fell swoop in a before-after fashion. The stakes here seem unaccountably to have been pitched very high indeed. It hardly requires us to endow the individual small animal with the full philosophical apparatus to account for why it may have the capacity to misrecognize itself in the look from the place of the other, which is all we require to set the passage between the imaginary and the symbolic emotion in Lacan's terms. After all, following Freud, the basic cateching of the zones of bodily activity in the apparatus of sensation, pleasure, and pain must be already in play, in however embryonic a form, in order for any relation of any kind to be established with the external world. There is already a relation to a source of pleasure, the relation of the mother in the imaginary. So there must be already something which is capable of recognizing what pleasure is. Lacan himself noted in his essay on the mirror stage that the child, at the age when he is for a time, however short, outdone by the chimpanzee instrumental intelligence, can nevertheless already recognize his own image in a mirror. What is more, the critic seems to be pitched in a rather binary before-after, either or logical form. The mirror stage is not the beginning of something, but the interruption, the loss, the lack, the division, which initiates the process that founds the sexually differentiated subject and the unconscious, and this depends not alone on the instantaneous formation of some internal cognitive capacity, but on the dislocating rupture of the look from the place of the other. For Lacan, however, this is already a fantasy. The very image which places the child divides its identity into two. Furthermore, that moment only has meaning in relation to the supporting presence and the look of the mother who guarantees its reality for the child. Peter Osborne notes, 1995, that in the field of the other, Lacan, 1977, describes the parent holding him up before the mirror, with the child looking toward the mother for confirmation, the child seeing her as a reference point, not his ego ideal, but his ideal ego. This argument, Osborne suggests, exploits the indeterminacy inherent in the discrepancy between the temporality of Lacan's description of the child's encounter with its bodily image in the mirror as a stage, and the punctuality of his depiction of it as a scene, the dramatic point of which is restricted to the relations between two characters alone. The child and its bodily image, however, as Osborne says, either it represents a critical addition to the mirror stage argument, in which case Y is not developed, or it introduces a different logic whose implications remain unaddressed in Lacan's subsequent work. The notion that nothing of the subject is there until the Oedipal drama is an exaggerated reading of Lacan. The assertion that subjectivity is not fully constituted until the Oedipal crisis has been resolved does not require a blank screen, tabula rasa, or a before-after conception of the subject initiated by a sort of coup d'etat, even if, as here's rightly noted, it leaves unsettled the problematic relationship between the individual and the subject. What is the individual small animal that is not yet a subject? One could add that Lacan's is only one of the many accounts of the formation of subjectivity, which takes account of unconscious psychic processes and the relation to other. And the debate may look different now that the Lacanian deluge is somewhat receding, and in the absence of the early powerful impulsion in that direction which we were given by Althusser's texts. In his thoughtful recent discussion of the Hegelian origins of this concept of recognition referred to above, Peter Osborne has criticized Lacan for the way in which the child's relation to the image is absolutized by being abstracted from the context of its relations to others, particularly the mother, while being made ontologically constitutive of the symbolic matrix in which the I is precipitated in a primordial form, and consider several other variants, Kristeva, Jessica, Benjamin, Laplanche, which are not so confined within the alienated misrecognition of the Lacanian scenario. These are useful pointers beyond the impasse in which this discussion in the wake of Althusser's Lacan has left us, with the threads of the psychic and the discursive spinning loose in our hands. Foucault, I will argue, also approaches the impasse with which his critique of Althusser's leaves us, but so to speak from the opposite direction, ruthlessly attacking the great myth of interiority, and driven both by his critique of humanism and the philosophy of consciousness, and by his negative reading of psychoanalysis. Foucault also undertakes a radical historicization of the category of the subject. The subject is produced as an effect through and within discourse, within specific discursive formations, and has no existence and certainly not transcendental continuity or identity from one object position to another. In his archaeological work, Madness and Civilization, The Bird of the Clinic, The Order of Things, The Archaeology of Knowledge, discourses construct subject positions through their rules of formation and modalities of enunciation. Powerfully compelling and original as these works are, the criticism leveled against them in this respect at least seems justified. They offer a formal account to the construction of subjects' positions within discourse, while revealing little about why it is that certain individuals occupy some subject positions rather than others. By neglecting to analyze how the social positions of individuals interact with the construction of certain these empty discursive subject positions, Foucault reinscribes an antinomy between subject positions and the individuals who occupy them. Thus, this archaeology provides a critical but one-dimensional formal account of the subject of discourse. Discursive subject positions become a priori categories which individuals seem to occupy in an unproblematic fashion. McNay, 1994. McNay cites Brown and Kozinski's observation that Foucault tends here to elide subject positions of statement with individual capacities to fill them. Brown and Cousins, 1980. Thus coming up against the very difficulty which Althusser failed to resolve by different routes. The critical shift in Foucault's work from an archaeological to a genealogical method does many things to render more concrete the somewhat empty formalism of the earlier work, especially in the powerful ways in which power, which was missing from the more formal account of discourse, is now centrally reintroduced, and the existing possibilities opened up by Foucault's discussion of the double-sided character of subjectification, assujettissement. Moreover, the centering of questions of power and the notion that discourse itself is a regulative and regulated formation, entry into which is determined by and constitutive of the power relations that permeate the social realm. McNay, 1994, brings Foucault's conception of the discursive formation closer to some of the classical questions which Althusser tried to address through the concept of ideology, shorn, of course, of its class reductionism, economistic and true claiming overtones. In the area of the theorization of the subject and identity, however, certain problems remain. One implication of the new conceptions of power elaborated in this body of work is the radical deconstruction of the body, the last residue or hiding place of man, and its reconstruction in terms of its historical, genealogical, and discursive formations. The body is deconstructed by, shaped and reshaped by insertion of a series of disciplinary discursive practices. Genealogy's task, Foucault proclaims, is to expose the body totally imprinted by history and the processes of history, destruction of the body. 1984. While we can accept this, with its radically constructivist implications, the body becomes infinitely malleable and contingent. I am not sure we can or ought to go as far as his proposition that nothing is in man, not even his body, is sufficiently stable to serve as a basis for self-recognition or for understanding other men. This is not because the body is such a stable and true referent for self-understanding, but because, though this may be a mere recognition, it is precisely how the body has served to function as the signifier of the condensation of subjectivities in the individual And this function cannot simply be dismissed because, as Foucault effectively shows, it is not true. Further, my own feeling is that despite Foucault's disclaimers, his invocation of the body as the point of application of a variety of disciplinary practices tends to lend this theory of disciplinary regulations a sort of displaced or misplaced concreteness, a residual materiality, and in this way operates discursively to resolve or appear to resolve the unspecified relationship between the subject, the individual, and the body. To put it crudely, it pins back together or sutures those things which the theory of the discursive production or subject, if taken to its limits, will irretrievably fracture and disperse. I think the body has acquired a totemic value in post-Foucauldian work precisely because of this talismanic status. It is almost the only trace we have left in Foucault's work of a transcendental signifier. The more well-established critique, however, has to do with the problem which Foucault encounters with theorizing resistance within the theory of power he deploys in Discipline and Punish and the History of Sexuality. The entirely self-policing conception of the subject, which emerges from the disciplinary, confessional, and pastoral modalities of power discussed there, and the absence of any attention to what might in any way interrupt, prevent, or disrupt the smooth insertion of individuals into the subject positions constructed by these discourses. The submission of the body to the soul to the normalizing regimes of truth constitutes a powerful way of rethinking the body's so-called materiality, which has been productively taken up by Nicholas Rose and the governmentality school, as well as in different mode by Judith Butler in Bodies That Matter, 1993. But it is hard not to take Foucault's own formulation seriously with all the difficulties it brings in its train, namely that the subject which are constructed in this way are docile bodies. There is no theorized account of how or why bodies should not always forever turn up in place at the right time, exactly the point from which the classical Marxist theory of ideology started to unravel, and the very difficulty which Althusser reinscribed when he normatively defined the function of ideology as to reproduce the social relations of production. Furthermore, there is no theorization of the psychic mechanism of interior processes by which these automatic interpolations might be produced, or more significantly, fail or be resisted or negotiated. Powerful and productive as this work undoubtedly is, then it remains the case that here Foucault steps too easily from describing disciplinary power as a tendency within modern forms of social control to positing disciplinary power as a fully installed monolithic force which saturates all social relations. This leads to an overestimation of the efficacy of disciplinary power and to an impoverished understanding of the individual, which cannot account for experiences that fall outside the realm of the docile body. McNay, 1994.